New business.
New business. 2026, 2027 budget discussion. I'm not sure how deep we're going into this. I know we've been talking about it for the last few months.
Yeah, so
I know we have a
I'll,
deficit and everything else.
just so for the, thanks, Mr. President. So, again, this will be more of a, sort of kind of a high level. Obviously with at the March 25th meeting, there will be a detailed presentation. That said, we've been having a lot of conversations through committee meetings, through non-quorum meetings, through one-on-ones, emails with a number of questions, really, and I want to thank and commend the board just for being incredibly engaged through this process, putting the time in, in the budget process as well as the negotiation process. The reorganization of the board in January is counterintuitive, really, when you think about it. It's in the middle of the year, and this year in particular, new board members were thrust into, as well as existing board members, thrust into some really, really difficult decisions, right? Whether it was negotiations, whether it was budget. And I just want to publicly acknowledge the way in which this board came together mid-year, midstream, and found a way to gel as a team to get this work done, and really for stepping into the fire as a board at arguably the most difficult time that it is to be a board member. So I just wanted to publicly thank the board. You don't get paid for this. I do. So when I'm spending long hours at meetings and things of that nature, I'm paid to do that. You're not. You're spending time away from your families and many other things to serve this community at a really incredibly challenging time, and I think you've done really an outstanding job. Obviously negotiations, one of the things that was so I don't know, complex about this budget process is, until, we were able to the board ratified the contract and the HTA ratified the contract, there was these concentric circles of the budget, of negotiations, of potentially outsourcing custodians, which really lent a level of complexity to this whole process. But as Board Member Lopresti said, and the negotiations chair said, the two sides were able to negotiate an agreement that at the end of the day was budget neutral, really.
Can you explain the term?
Of course. It's actually, well, I think it's first to understand it's a 3-year deal, right? But the first year of that contract is the year we're in, right? By budget neutral, I mean that, and as Mrs. Lopresti mentioned, the association conceded time back to the district, right? And while, $150,000 may not seem like a lot, believe it or not, it was enough to fund the raises that were included in the contract, right? The first year of the contract was and I thought it represented a wonderful concession on the part of the association because it was, I'm just going to say it, the first year of the contract is 3.15, okay? And it was what we had budgeted for the first year of contract. Now, the association could have pushed back on that because that is significantly lower than county average. But I thought that was a great gesture of good faith on the part of the association, recognizing that we'd only budgeted that and recognizing that we were already in a tough financial situation. So they hardlined us for higher raise in that first year. Where's it coming from, right? It would only further undermine the financial solvency of the district in this fiscal year. And what you realize is that for every 1/10 of a point, right, so if we look at 3.15 as our baseline, which is essentially what the agreement was for the last several years, every 1/10 of a percentage point that you go above that is about $30,000. So in year 2, it's 3.4, right? So that's 3 percentage points, which means $90,000. If we're saving $150,000 due to the concessions made for duties, well, do the math. That's actually a savings for the district. And there's this slightly lesser savings in the third year, 3.5, but it's still a savings. So we were able to negotiate an agreement that was budget neutral. It's not costing the district any more money. And at the same time, was bringing a level of operational efficiency to our schools. In this day and age, you'd be hard-pressed to find another negotiation process in another public school district that has gone the way this one went, where you really saw a level of compromise and sacrifice made on both sides. So, and I mentioned that contextualized within the budget, because that was obviously a key piece to that. So we talk about the financial realities, right? And I've talked about this before. If you read my newsletters, if you watch the videos of the board meetings where I've spoken to this, you'll understand that the financial crisis we are facing now began a long time ago. It began in 2011 under the Christie administration when the 2% cap came into play. What that essentially did is starting, what is that, 15 years ago? 15 years ago? It created a construct whereby school districts were managing a structural deficit every year, right? Simple math, right? If a teachers association contract is settling at a reasonable, a more than reasonable 3%, which is certainly less than CPI now, then we know that if we can only raise revenues 2%, we already have a shortfall just by virtue of giving our valued staff a modest raise. And so for the last 15 years, we've trimmed and we've cut and we've become leaner and leaner and leaner. We found a way to do it, particularly this school district. I bristle when I see folks out there on social media talking about how this district's been financially irresponsible. That is as far from the truth as you could possibly imagine. And you need look no further than the presentation we made last year when these same allegations were being made in public, and you see a district that historically settled contracts with the Teachers Association below county average and below state average. I think it was only 1 year over a 15-year period of time that districts settled a contract that was above both the county and the state averages for teacher settlements. You look at a teacher salary that is slightly above the county average. You look at administrative costs and administrative salaries that are below the county average. The data points are there for anyone who cares to look at them that paint a picture of a district that has managed its finances very conservatively. But not even, and to some extent, that is a piece of why we are where we are, right? Because your percentage in the tax levy is based upon your aggregate operational budget. And the more you were raising taxes over the years, the bigger your operating budget is, and the more that 2% is that you're actually able to levy. But obviously we've been dealt some death blows. Well, not death. They're not quite fatal, Chandana, but they're heavy. Started with COVID, right? Because we had all this influx of ARP money, right? And then the ARP money dried up. That was one. But it's really been these exponentially rising costs, right? I just mentioned that a 3% increase in salary would be a challenge. Now we're talking about a 32% increase in health benefits. And Mr. Lubetsky's right. It is part of a larger broken system. And I agree. Are we going to blame the first grade teacher who is in the classroom giving her or his heart and soul to teach and nurture students on a daily basis for a broken state system? I hope not. I hope we're not blaming that person, right? But we are now in a situation, we're not alone, right? We have plenty of company all around the state, okay? And you're going to see this play out in school district across the state where they're at a crossroads, right? Where they have deficits that they can close in one of two ways or a hybrid. Raising taxes, right? Or just mass layoffs and program cuts. And let's talk about taxes for a second. I want to talk about revenue. And I'm going to go on a little bit, but I think it's all important for the community to hear. So a school district is limited in the way it can generate revenue, right? We can't borrow. We can't deficit spend like our federal government with tens and tens of trillions of dollars of deficit and credit card debt, okay, and college tuition debt. We can't do that. We have to balance our budget every year, down to the penny. Right? We can carry over a limited percentage of that of unused funds into the next year. I lost my train of thought. Give me a sec. I'm rolling here. Where was it, Pete? Can't deficit spend. We can go to the tax levy, 2%. In Homedale, 2% on our budget's $1.3 million. $1.3 million. That's what we raised through the 2% tax levy. Simply to pay the increment, and I'm not saying that in the pejorative about our teacher's contract. Again, like to provide a reasonable raise to our professional educators and our hardworking staff, we're already at a deficit. Before we even talked about health care or rising special education tuition or rising transportation costs, none of it. We're already at a deficit. Okay, and I'm not a finance guy. Fortunately, we have a lot of finance people on the board. I'm not. I've learned a little bit over the years, right? So in the absence of levying taxes, and I'm not here as a non-Homedale taxpayer to suggest we should or we shouldn't. I'm just here to tell you what happens if we don't, right? And maybe to some extent give some perspective on what we're talking about with these tax raises. So let's get to the brass tacks. So the budget that is being proposed for the board's consideration next week, we started at about a $7 million deficit. Crazy, right? Give or take. I see Mrs. DeSaro, she's always checking my homework. And we've been able to, through a number of things, we've been able to whittle that down. And I have to acknowledge the fact that part of that, and again, it goes back to that cooperation piece, okay, between the administration, the board, and the Teachers Association, was that, of course, if you've been paying attention, you know we had to move back into the state plan and incur a 32% increase. In collaboration with the local Teachers Association, over 129 of our employees switched from the legacy NJ Direct 10 and 15 plans into the SEHP, which saved the district over $2 million. Right? So we were able to, cut that deficit down significantly right off the bat. And then we got word from the state that that we could go up to, it was 32%. On the healthcare waiver. Basically, the healthcare waiver enables districts to levy additional taxes above the 2% to make up for the increase in cost. And yes, Mr. Lebecki is right, and anyone who states this is right. We are, the local taxpayer is bearing the burden for a broken system. So let's talk about that burden for a second, right? The budget that's being proposed would represent using the full health care waiver, okay? I should say the budget that the administration is going to present to the board, and this shouldn't come as a surprise, not that I'm suggesting everyone on the board agrees with that position, but that is after having meetings with all board members, having an understanding that there would be consensus to go to the full health care waiver. That would generate us another $3 million, okay? So that put our deficit somewhere in the neighborhood of, like, I want to say between 2 3/4, just under 3 million, down from 7. We got some good news that our state aid wasn't getting cut. It was going up $70,000. It's basically de minimis, but it didn't require that we had to make any additional cuts. So let's talk about the burden, right? Insofar as you see it as a burden, right? We are in a storm right now in our country. Okay, in our world. Look around. War, private sector, shuttering brick and mortar locations, people being laid off en masse. We are in a storm, an economic storm right now. That is a function of many broken systems, right? And those are bearing down on the local level. So the burden that the budget which the administration is going to propose, it does represent a tax increase of, now, Deb, correct me if I'm wrong. There's two numbers. The one's adjusted with debt service, but essentially it's 7.2, or is it 6.9?
7.2 is just the general tax levy.
Okay.
When you adjust it for debt service, which is down a little bit, then you come to that, I think it's 6.94.
Okay. Which comes to approximately an annual impact on the average household of $700 a year. It's not a small amount of money. I'm not suggesting it's a small amount of money, okay? But when you divide that number up between 12 months, right? What does that come out to, about 65? I don't know. $65 a month, right? And so the question that the board has to ask themselves, right? Because when we used to vote on school budgets, the community made that decision. The community decided, are we willing to bear this $65 a month burden to salvage and to maintain the school district that we all moved here for? The community voted. But when the 2% cap came in, we no longer voted. And it was, all of that responsibility was placed on the shoulders of the board, right? So the board will have to make the decision on the 25th. Do we feel that that is a reasonable burden to place on the taxpayers, the average taxpayer of Homedale, $65 a month to maintain the quality of the school district? Now, I already know what Mrs. Lopresti's thinking over there, all right? And so I'm gonna preempt.
Got a lot of comments to get off my chest
Oh, I
tonight.
bet you do. I'm going to preempt Mrs. Lopresti for a second. If we were to say, you know what, if we can get through this year, we're good, right? We're just going to ask you to bear this burden one more year, and then we're back to stasis. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? Now, of course, none of us knows what next year is going to bring, but if it's the status quo, it's going to bring similarly expensed health care. Now, our deficit theoretically should be lower because in a moment I'm going to talk about cuts, and you know, our overall operating budget will be lower, so theoretically the deficit will be lower. And of course, if the budget goes as proposed, we'll also have levied the taxes to expand our operational budget, but that deficit will still be there. And the same decision will be there next year, right? Now, if you listen to the town committee meeting, I forget exactly what the date was. I wasn't able to attend, but you know, Mayor Impreveduto spoke about, we'll put the questions to the community. He shared a similar perspective with us when we met with him privately with, you know, board leadership and his leadership. And maybe he's right, right? I certainly don't think anyone sitting on this dais, you know, wants to make those decisions for the community, right? To just be presumptuous about the fact that, well, no, we're not going to ask you. We're just going to cut this and that and this and that. I mean, to me, I think that's going to become standard operating procedure. That's just my opinion. Across the state in public education, communities are going to be faced with two choices. Close an annual deficit of $3 million or whatever it may be through cutting people and programs, or put public votes to the community to determine the will of the community. Is it the will of the community to pay an additional $60 a month? And even if that is annually, let the community decide. Because it's unfair and unreasonable to ask the 9 people sitting around this table to be to sort of soothsay for the community and understand in the absence of a vote how the community really feels. You know, there's people on social media saying yes, there's people on social media saying no. Well, what is the collective will of the community, right? But that's where we are, right? And so last year I talked about a port in the storm budget, right, Ms. Lopresti? And unfortunately, we're still in the storm. But in some ways, it's, you know, we were in one port, we're back out on the turbulent sea, and we're looking to get back into another port for another year, and you know, find safety for another year. But it's not entire safety, because last year we were, and I'm coming to the end here, and I really do appreciate your patience as I work through some of these points. Last year, it really truly was port in the storm, because we had very minimal cuts last year. We utilized bank cap, we utilized some healthcare waiver, and I think we had very few cuts. We had, you know, we were able to cut positions, but not really people wouldn't really lose their jobs. It was, you know, and by the way, I have to note, for anyone that's been paying attention, we have cut positions every year since I've been here. I would say between 20 and 25 positions have been cut, but we were managing $750,000 deficits, $1.5 million deficits. So it was much easier to get there. And what that also did is the aforementioned leanness, which came about from 2011, was now we're to the bone, right? We were to the bone after that, after the last several years. So there's going to be cuts. I will say, and I think, and I met with all board members, we walked through all the cuts. And I think all board members walked away from it saying, like, all right, like, it's not great, but it's not terrible. And they're right. Like, these cuts will happen, and we will look very much the same as we did this year. But this will be the last year that we'll be able to look the same. If we have to cut another 25 positions, we will look very different. than we do this year. And so these cuts will, they're full-time positions. We're talking about a minimum of 28 cuts, of 28 positions, okay? It could be more. We're in the final stages of it. I'm trying to save those last ones because as you go down that list, they get more painful. You know what I mean? Like in the beginning, you're talking about, all right, like class size at 24. Not great. We'd rather it be at 21 or 22, but we can live with that for if that's as high as it goes, right? We don't want to get too much higher than that. But when you start to get down to the bottom, and tonight I'm not going to talk in specifics because I want to be very thoughtful and deliberate about the way this information's is certainly spoken about publicly in order that the people who are impacted by these cuts, that we can be sensitive in how we convey this information to them. 7 hourly employees, 4 part-time employees, 19 of the cuts are certificated staff, meaning that they're either instructional staff or staff members, whether they be EA members or unaffiliated, hold a certificate to do their job. Next week's budget presentation, I'm going to speak in much greater depth about those positions, but I want to be mindful of the people who these cuts are going to impact. And that will get us to stasis. I should mention one other thing because I believe it's been talked about publicly, and then I'll close and open it up to questions from the board or the community. We do understand that the town committee is considering the purchase of Addie's house, the Lubkirk house. And it's been last valuation, Mrs. Donnelly, did you walk the site with the town administrator and the?
Ken did yesterday. I did not, and we didn't have a chance today to recap.
So their assessor walked the building.
Right, so we await, they would get an appraisal and then, I guess, be able to make an offer.
Okay. The number is somewhere around $900,000, right? My recommendation is that goes directly into our reserves and our fund balance. Because, again, paying attention, we are under the statutory required fund balance. And if it wasn't for Mrs. Donnelly's effervescent personality and diplomacy skills, the county BA would be we could be monitored. We could be in the initial phase of monitoring. But, Debbie's taken steps to rectify that as much as she could, and they know we're moving in the right direction. But that would be my recommendation, would be that money goes directly into our reserves and our fund balance for possible unexpected costs, right? Like maybe we get our health care quote next year and it's even higher. Who knows? And we have to absorb a $500,000 or $750,000 hit in the middle of the year. These things happen. And we have no provision for levying or gathering more revenue mid-year. We got what we got, and that's all we can use. So I know that's a lot of soapboxing, some information, but I wanted to just sort of prime the pump and contextualize some of the decisions that are being made, and then, of course, which will be presented in great detail at next week's meeting. That's all I got.
So I'm not even going to comment on what you said, except for the fact that you spoke about the fact that since you've been here, you've cut 20 to 25 positions. I want to just say to the public that the reason you really haven't heard about that is because they're quieter cuts that have been gained through retirements. So there's already been, for instance, perhaps a math teacher or a 4th grade teacher retired, we just didn't fill that position. So there's been cuts, but in a much quieter way because it was people retired and we just didn't fill those positions.
Yeah, and they're cuts that you wouldn't necessarily see on the outside, right? So, one example is when I came in, there were a number of instructional coaches, right? These were teachers, but that served as peer coaches to other teachers. It's a best practice, actually, in the research. But it's not an absolute necessity. We've had to lean on our curricular supervisors to do that, and that's okay, right? And so we've pivoted and we've adjusted and we've reallocated resources to do those things. But that's a good example of something that's been cut over the last several years. You wouldn't hear about it because we continue to perform.
And a vice principal from the high school got cut. Like,
This-
certain things
yeah.
have gotten cut, but other things were, a lot of, the bulk have been quiet ones through
100%.
retirement, and then some other ones that have been shifting, so.
100%.
Comments from the board? Start whatever side you guys want to start on. Yeah. You got your red light on. You're-
I'm gonna wait for my comments because I'm thinking about some things and I'm starting to fume and I don't want to fume. So
Yeah, don't fume. It's not going
I'm
to
gonna allow
help.
myself to relax.
Start over.
And nothing from what you said. I think you gave an excellent presentation of what the public should actually know and be aware of. I think what kind of boils my blood is the BS, once again,
Don't get fuming. Wait.
of people that say things just to get a rise out of people about misspending. Since I've gotten here and before that, I think we've been the most transparent board that the town has seen with regards to how much money and where our money goes in every aspect. And we are lean and mean, and we're going to only get leaner. And,
We're going to get nicer, though,
yeah,
not meaner.
leaner and nicer, yeah. And, but I think it's just, it's unfortunate. It's, I'm going to digress.
Well, I think it's unfortunate, Anthony, because, listen, you're exactly right. Board's here twice a month, I'm accessible, and you have questions, concerns, you've heard this or that, no problem. Send an email, set up a meeting, come to a meeting. There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking questions, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with holding your superintendent, and if you feel it's appropriate, to hold your public officials accountable. But do it through proper channels. That's all. And if for whatever reason the proper channels fail you, then take to social media and exercise your demons. But start with the formal channels and then take it there.
What makes it more disgusting, it's more of just a political push rather than truly trying to find out what's actually happening or give people the right information. It's just purely politics. And this is not supposed to be politics here, right? This is just supposed to be for the children. You want to go for politics, go run for town council or committee, sorry. But, that's not what this is. So, but everybody plays the politics game and tries to sway people's thoughts on what is really happening. And they're giving the wrong information. So all I can tell is every person in the public, do not take your information from social media, especially places that have no business making comments about what is going on here. Because I tell you what, most of those people making comments, I said it before, are not showing up to these meetings and getting good information whatsoever. And they make like they are, but because they want to push an agenda. So just keep that in mind.
Dr. Cascone, I actually asked you this question because since we've been on the board, the three of us, right? So there's 3 new board members this year, and my question to you, because we're basically, there's a learning curve, we're drinking from a fire hose, right? And basically, since we've been on the board, I could speak for myself, being on the negotiations committee, there were so many ad hoc, emergency meetings where they just went on for hours. I mean, between that, a job, family, kids, everything else, right? So there's been very little time to kind of take in all of the procedures and the rules and all of that, right? So having said that, my question to you very recently was, what is this board doing differently, this collective board right now, doing differently than the previous board as early as the end of last year, that some people might be saying that we're less transparent? So I don't even know the answer to that.
I do.
Wait, but how are if we're saying the only difference between this board and last year were 3 seats, how are we that much less transparent? What are we doing differently? Because when we got here, the only thing that I understood to be a change from last year was, instead of all cows, if I'm getting the terminology right, is just that we're alternating just so we could do some of the minutia, work behind the scenes with subcommittee, but all of the findings and results are still brought to public at the dais, right? So if we're just alternating that schedule, what else, since you've been the constant here, what else are we doing differently that we're seemingly less transparent right now? I have no idea. No idea.
You know, every board, you know, every board is different, right? In ways, right? You know, I kind of like, I'm not really the coach because I report to you, but sometimes I feel like I'm the coach, right? Because, you know, except for Kim, nobody else, I don't believe anybody else on the board comes from the public education world, right? So, you know, part of my job is to sort of like coach you on what this thing's all about, right? And particularly when you first get in. But every team, every board is different. You know, to me, the only difference, and maybe this is where it's coming from, is that the previous board felt really strongly about putting out publications that came from the board, right? And again, like, I don't think this board has even had time to even think about, like, you know, operating procedures. And again, that's part of the limitation of a January reorg. When you get thrown into this fire right away, is like, you're not thinking about quality control or what kind of the real work for that happens in the summer, right? When we can breathe a little bit and, you know, maybe do a board retreat where we can think about, all right, like, what are our goals and how are we going to accomplish them, right? And I think, you know, last board, like, a big part for them was communication, right? Like, they wanted to get more messaging out about what the board was doing. And so that was where the board newsletter sort of grew out of that. And maybe that's a goal for this board as well, but the reality of this is we haven't had any time to talk about it.
And that's certainly true. I was the chair of the communications committee last year.
Right.
And listen, I don't think you made a bad decision, but also I think you made a decision based upon our needs at the moment right now, that there's no longer a communications committee. I think that somebody kind of running or just at least putting an organization together with regards to our communication to the community is a good thing. But also from the perspective of Joanne, I don't think that there has been any lapse of transparency from then till now. Quite frankly, I don't think there's been enough done to be able to actually say that we have been not transparent within 3 months.
And I
mean, there's
think
nothing to
that's the
have
point.
gotten done.
Right.
Except, yes, we had a contract negotiation, but that's also something we cannot talk about
Correct.
within
So-
those 3 months. So there's really, I don't think there's any differentiator between what the board of now is to what the board of the last 3 years or whatever, however span you want to talk about
Well, that's
it.
exactly what I was trying to understand in a bottom line. So I guess the underlying question that I was going to ask you was, outside of the board initiating whatever newsletter, but as far as the flow of information, as far as business conducted, conversations had, issues discussed, decisions made, has there been any less of a flow in communication because it's not coming from the board? I mean, are you not putting out newsletters? Would that also suffice for whatever communications outside of what's done in board meetings? I'm asking for real, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that the most, what I've seen in my time as a superintendent and also as an administrator is more times than not, the board doesn't do that. Now, that's not to say it's right or wrong either way, but I think, quite frankly, I think that, you know, it's a large investment of time on top of an investment of time, and I think, you know, board members have limited time as their volunteers. So it's not, I mean, at the end of the day, as the superintendent, I am sort of outside of these times when you're here in public, I am sort of your spokesperson, right, for the district. Now, if it's something, now in negotiations is a little bit different because it is technically a process that is done between the board and the local bargaining units. That's a little bit different. You could argue that it is more appropriate for the board to communicate out about negotiations as they are able. But again, I mean, I think that, you know, the reorg happened and then we were going 1,000 miles an hour. I mean, literally, it was crazy, right? Up until, it was like a roller coaster ride until we got to the February 25th meeting, which not for nothing was three weeks ago in a blizzard ago. And it was literally, it was just so fast paced, and I was managing the school district. The board was working on getting a contract done. We were managing budget issues. So no, I don't see that. That's, you know, that said, like, and again, but that's what makes it so difficult, right? Because if somebody emailed the board with a cogent perspective, right, that you could consider and say, you know what, that's a fair point. Maybe we should be reflective as we go into next year and thinking about our communication practices or so. But what are you going to do? You're going to evaluate your practices based upon something that's being bandied about on Facebook? I think not, right? If you've evaluated it yourself, honestly, and said, you know what, like, I feel like we've been, we all feel like we've been good. Well,
Agreed.
Right?
Anyone can come to this space and voice whatever concerns or questions rather than just railing online.
I'm just going to, two things, but BOE newsletter, how many actually went out last year? A couple? Like, it's not like they were monthly newsletters, correct?
No, but
Quarterly?
they were done in a space where it covered multiple different subjects.
No, I know, but
to
it's
be
like-
able
but
to give
quarterly
people
maybe?
the opportunity. It was quarterly,
So,
yes.
I mean, we're still in that quarter.
was about
then.
4, yeah.
Like, so if we wanted to do that, we're still within that quarter, but could we
Well,
get?
there's 2
I'm-
weeks
I'm
left,
going to
so
try
Get to
to.
writing.
If you want to go
I'm going to
handle
try
that.
to get us back on track to actually budget discussion. But like, I think we all feel that we're being transparent, but the topic right now is budget, so I just want to kind of stay on the budget conversation, because that's where we are.
Ray, you want to go first? Because I got
I have a question.
I got a lot.
No, I just have a question. So I know it came up during our smaller sessions about, because the big thing is pulling the budget up to the maximum amount, right? To the 6.97%, whatever the number actually is. You mentioned that we might be able to pull it up, but reserve some of that, right? So that is something I thought worth mentioning.
yeah, so that's, the healthcare waiver you don't have to utilize it all. And Debbie, you looked into this, and apparently you can accrue part of that as bank cap, is that right? Yeah. The only challenge with that is, Ray, is that, for example, like I don't read it, but sometimes people send me screen captures. And, this idea that taxes have gone up X percentage over the last number of years, that's true. But the reason they've gone up that much over the last several years is because those percentages were increased by using bank cap, which the only reason the district had that bank cap was because they passed 0% budgets 2 consecutive years. One was the year I got here, and the one was the year before. In fact, I think the year before it was minus 0%. So I think that's important. I just wanted to mention one other thing. I apologize. This was another thought I had. Because I saw, again, some nonsense, and I'm not going to say it verbatim because I don't want to dignify the person who wrote it, who I don't even believe is a resident of this town, but that's neither here nor there. We do have a spending problem, right? But it also depends upon how you define problem, right? What else has happened in schools over the course of the last 4 decades? We are no longer just teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. If we were, then our budget would be significantly less than it is. But what else are we doing? Okay. Well, we understand through the research that we want to nurture the whole child, right? So we have an expansive extracurricular program. We feed our children. We transport our children. We've had an increasing amount of need for mental health and behavioral support services. The scope of what public, and we are a rec center to boot, right? So we are, but truly, we are community meeting places. What would our communities be without our schools the way they are? They'd be a shadow of themselves because of all that our school districts offer. So we are where we are because over time, our schools have become so much more to the community. And the reality of it is like, no, like we don't have to raise taxes, but as a community, are we comfortable with our school district becoming far less? And because if we just are a place where kids come to learn English and math and science and social studies, then, oh yes, we could operate a much lower budget. But we've been called upon to do much more, and there are not that many places that people can go for those services. There are some people who depend upon the behavioral support services that we provide in our schools. For whatever reason. While that's less the case here in Homedale, it's not unprecedented. So I just wanted to mention that. And Greg, I actually want to thank you because it was in one of our meetings that you sort of made that point, and I thought that was really astute.
Yeah, I'll comment quickly on that. I come from the world of healthcare, right? Healthcare is a social backstop, and it's not optional, and schools are the same. You have the same legal mandates, the same obligation, the same responsibility. As a new board member, I think one of the most eye-opening things for me during our orientation was the extent to which the school, has to be staffed to provide comprehensive services, right? So, if your kid is Googling suicide on a Chromebook that the school issued, we actually respond to that 24 hours a day, right? The obligation doesn't end there, right? If a suicidal kid shows up, or a family calls and a cop goes to deal with it, they'll bring them to me. They'll take them to the hospital. There's an hour of paperwork the cop has to do, and they're done, right? Maybe there's a CPS call involved. That happens here, though, and the need for ongoing assessment, not just of the student, the family, and then whatever other intervention is needed has to be provided, and has to be provided on an ongoing basis, right? And again, it's mandated, it's not optional. So what we have to staff for, what we have to provide for, and to do that, with successive cuts, it's a social backstop.
A few more things. If you can explain why next week is so important, just the timeline of this budget, so that I hope people are listening today, but why this week you have less than 7 days. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a soapbox here, but I've watched all these TC meetings over the last several months, and they're out the door. No one comes to our meetings. No one writes emails. Well, not no one, not enough people. We don't have a lot of time. If you want to help shape this and have your input heard and considered, you have to show up this week, because we have to make a decision next Wednesday. And then Debbie, what happens next, in terms of the budget?
Well, actually, this year, we were given an extra week. We really would have presented the not-to-exceed budget tonight, but because the governor had more time to present the state budget and provide us our state aid, that gave us the extra week. So by the 27th, our budget has to be in the hands of the executive county superintendent for their review. So that's the timetable.
So please, everyone, write your emails. Even coming to the meeting next week and voicing, it might be a little bit too late. So you got to do some work now. I'm asking you to show up. I've done this. I said this a lot of times last year. You have to show up, because we're going to make a decision, and once it's done, we can't unwind it, right? And I know you care, because you're going to those TC meetings, and I know you do care. There are members here I know showed up as private citizens to those meetings to show their concern. So please, we ask you to show up and write your emails so we can make an informed decision for you.
And I would say, go back to the presentation on the financial overview that we did several months ago, talking about that fund balance, right? Because that's important. And if we overspend, we don't have a crutch like we had years ago. So we built budgets, 0% increases, that were utilizing some of fund balance that was built over time. We don't have that luxury anymore.
And again, you've done many presentations, very detailed, a lot of transparency, so thank you for doing that. They're all up on the website. Just start working through the material. That's what I ask our community to do.
I hope they listen to you, Ray, because I think we spent all of last year asking for engagement, and we rarely get it. But
Sarika,
It's not to thank the 5 people that showed up for the first time. And
this is the most
Thank
we've
you.
had in a long
This
time.
is honestly a
coming,
big one.
seriously.
Sarika, I see your mic on. So.
Yeah, something quick. And you have more to say? Yeah. All right. I don't go to social media, so I don't even know what everybody's talking about, which is good. Okay, right, yeah. So there's just this one question that I've seen floating around and questioned, and I know we've talked about it, Dr. Cascone, and I know you've explained it, and I think we're working on it, but I wanted to just bring that up so that you can publicly kind of say it again, what we're doing about this. The question that does make sense, if you look at just the numbers, is that the number of students is coming down, and then the number of teachers is increasing. So how do you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that question, because, it was something that I meant to speak to in my comments. So, if you go back 15 years, you're looking at I think at a high point about 3,500. Over the last 10 years, the decline has not been nearly as precipitous. It's actually sort of leveled off. And more lately, it's sort of actually sort of fluctuating upward by small percentage points. And that's a great question, because you think, well, gosh, if we're so overstaffed, why do we get so quickly to class size increases and program cuts, right? I mean, we're so heavy staffing-wise. And the reality of it is this. There are structural inefficiencies in our schedules. There are. They've been talked about in public meetings, right? It was part of why initially the board was really, really pushing in the negotiations process to claw back this second professional period, right? But something happened over the course of the negotiations. Through honest dialogue, right, and research and gathering information, is the board negotiations team and the board realized that if we were to claim back those two professional periods, it would bring significant and negative changes to our schools. Let's look at Indian Hill, for example. If we removed the second professional period from Indian Hill and went back to the way the schedule was before, there were two things that would have happened at least. The first is we would go back to half years of science and social studies. I can tell you our science test scores certainly would not go back if we did that. And secondly, our math and language arts minutes would be cut in half. And so the board was faced with a conundrum. They were like, darn it, we really wanted that second professional period, but we're pretty sure we don't want that, right? But there's no question that the second professional period, and it's really just simple math, right? Like if every teacher in a school can teach one more instructional period, let's round up to 70 teachers at one instructional period, 70 periods, and at 5 periods a day per teacher, it's a lot of staff. And we did the numbers, and although we had some differences of opinion with our friends in the association, I think we agreed that, we were probably going to realize a savings of over $2 million. That would have been a lot of lost staff as well. And so there was a pivot in the process at that point in time. It also, I think, if the board had stayed really hell-bent, if you pardon the expression, on that, we would have gone to impasse and fact-finding a lot more quickly than we did. And so the board pivoted and said, all right, you know what? We don't think we want that, even though we know there's a savings there. Let's see if we can get back some of the professional periods, right? And where we landed was where we landed. But even if the association had given us 2 or 3 professional periods a week, it would have been a savings of somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000, maybe. Not game-changing money, not small money, but not game-changing money. And I think also through various dialogue, we learned that that second professional period is also used for a lot of other things. Professional development. We can have teachers come to that professional period for an IEP meeting or a 504 meeting. Otherwise, we would have to pay them or pull them out of class. And so there was a collective realization to that. That was never really, this is the first time that's really being spoken about publicly, but that's sort of how it played out behind the scenes in the negotiations process. But it is a structural inefficiency in this, well, I shouldn't say it that way. It requires more staff to staff the schedules that govern our buildings on a daily basis. It just does. The second piece is, and this is one that we can fix, thankfully, but it's also another structural inefficiency, and it's the middle school. So at the middle school, when they converted over to that rotating drop block schedule, which looking back on it, I wasn't here for it, but it's SATS. Did I say high school? Middle school. Should have never been done for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that is developmentally inappropriate for our kids. They decline precipitously in math and language arts instruction when they get to the middle school. The rotation itself for learners of that age. But it's also expensive because in order to make that schedule go, we need to offer 10 electives in 7th grade and 12 electives in 8th grade. That's at least 3 times what a typical middle school offers. Typical middle schools have 4 marking periods and they offer a different cycle each marking period. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a beautiful program. I mean, it's amazingly diverse, the things that our kids get today, but it's also expensive because we need teachers designated to teach all elective schedules. We have teachers that can't necessarily teach full loads of core academic courses. So that's the answer to your question, Dr. Kallur, is because of the structures of our schedules, and yes, a provision in the bargaining agreement, right, which was agreed to several boards ago before I think any of us were here, and that's really where it comes from, and that point's right. I'll close on this. That point was drilled into my skull, metaphorically speaking, in doing this budget this year, because I was pulling my hair out, not that there's much to pull out, and was going, where is it? Where can I find it? And the reality of it is that's why we go so quickly to class size and to program cuts, because it requires a lot of staff to staff our schedules. That's the reality of it.
We are addressing it this year. Yeah.
Well, we
Slow, as much as we can, yeah.
there were efforts to address it through the collective bargaining process. We landed, as we've already shared, in a budget neutral position, fair compromises. And what I will tell you is that the middle school administration is working on this now. Why? Because we need to come into the school year next year with a recommendation to the board for community feedback, and to understand what that schedule change is not only going to do, most importantly, to be a better schedule for middle-aged learners, but also what savings it's going to realize. Now, I don't want to minimize that, because that is going to mean people losing their jobs, and we never want to do that. But kids first, right? And so we'll be prepared to have whatever savings are associated with that to inform the 27-28 budget. You're welcome.
Sarika, I was going to say, with your teachers, I mean, I remember sitting here year after year after year, and budgets were better. We would add teachers every year. I remember coming to the back-to-school night or the back-to-school meeting in August, whatever it is, there'd be 40, 50 new bodies out there for STEM courses, science, AP courses, electives, whatever it was. I mean, every year we were adding to it, and, unfortunately, we can't do that anymore. And I think, like Scott said, the last couple of years we've reduced, Anthony, Gattini, he was our IT director. We didn't replace him. We literally did without him. And obviously, the guys have done a tremendous job, but there's been so many of those positions that we just didn't replace. And, unfortunately, just a different time. So we just have to do what we have to do. And it was great when we had all those teachers, and all those extracurricular. And I think that's what made this district even better. And it's increased. I know when we took the teachers in Indian Hill and made social studies, science, and math, we made them specialists. We took them out of the classroom, and then that's all they did. And obviously, the blue ribbon award they got was probably a big piece to doing so well.
No, there's no question about it. If you look at the increase in the test scores at Indian Hill over the last half a dozen years, they've gone up precipitously. Aligned with when that schedule changed. And it's not rocket science. More instructional time in math and language arts, test scores tend to go up.
I got the mic, finally. Yeah. I've got a lot to get off my chest tonight, so I have a lot of notes here. I'm just gonna, I didn't want to forget anything, but, I know I've been saying it for 2 years that I've been on the board, and this year is going to be no different than, and I think even more loudly last year, that nothing about our financial reality has changed. It just hasn't. It's the only thing that's really changed is the noise surrounding it, and that it's actually here now, and that we're on that cliff that we're facing. Numbers don't lie, so we can talk about them yet again. 80% of our budget are salaries, benefits, and pensions, and then transportation is about 7%. So there's 87% of a budget that is the discretionary spending is so little for the district. This isn't new information. Last year's board went to extraordinary lengths. I know we're getting back to that transparency thing, but it's more about we spent countless hours putting together, I know Chris and I kind of were the driving force behind that. Anthony would kind of led it from the communication standpoint. Having that honest and clear conversation with the community, whether it was newsletters and then all of us in public meetings and discussions. So none of this should really be a surprise to anyone that has been engaged and been listening. It's definitely not a problem we didn't see coming. There's also this huge push within the community about, pilot funds from the town is going to fix this problem. And it's not going to fix the problem. It's not a solution. You can't fix a structural problem just with temporary revenue sources. It just doesn't work like that. There are also no day one fixes to a structural deficit. There's been no financial mismanagement, as as Scott has alluded to many times over, and we've explained and we've been transparent about. There are no painless options that we're faced with this year, and this is definitely not a hidden crisis that has suddenly appeared. The trajectory we have been on has been clear for a long time, and it's been communicated openly with the community. So, as Deb said, this year the state is so kindly allowing districts to exceed our traditional tax caps. And again, this is not a solution. It's the state shifting the burden to local taxpayers yet again. Allowing the district to increase school taxes more is not reform. It's just an admission of failure at the state level. It's the state asking taxpayers to bail them out for their ineptitude. And I will not support a system where the answer is always ask taxpayers for more. Because for many in this community, $700, $750, $1,000, whatever it may be, might not be a lot. But for, a good chunk of this community, maybe half, it's not just $1,000. It's groceries, it's medication, it's whether they can afford to stay in their house. Once taxes go up, they don't come back down. That becomes the new baseline. So talking about a big tax increase this year is not a one-time tax increase. And anyone telling you that is not telling you the truth. Let's just look at our neighbor, Middletown. We don't have to guess how this plays out. We look at them. Last year, Middletown raised its school taxes over 10% under the guise of saving 3 schools. And how did that pan out? What are they facing this year? They're seemingly going ahead with closing those same 3 schools. This is not a coincidence. It's proof that you can't throw money and think the systemic structural problems will magically disappear. That is exactly what happens when you try to solve a structural problem with higher taxes instead of a structural change. If we go down the same path, we should expect the same result. We will be right back here next year having the same conversation, asking for more and explaining why it still isn't enough. So why do costs keep rising? Teachers contribute a fixed percentage to their salary toward pensions and health care. That percentage is set by law. Pensions are based on final salaries. So when salaries increase through contract step increases, inflation, the long-term pension liability increases. Healthcare works the same. Costs rise faster than inflation, and even if contribution percentages stay the same, the total costs grow significantly. Who absorbs the difference? Taxpayers. Contributions are fixed, benefits are guaranteed, shortfalls have to be covered. The risk isn't in the structure. The risk in this structure isn't within the system, it sits with the public. And school districts have very limited options to absorb those costs. The only thing we can really do is cut staff, cut programs, or raise taxes, and even that's limited. That's it, that's the model, it's not sustainable. These issues have everything to do with the structure of our educational system, a system where costs rise automatically, inputs are generally fixed, and control is limited. A system that forces districts into impossible choices. Every decision we make will be public. Every vote next week will be on the record. This is not the time to avoid hard choices. I said it in most meetings last year that engagement is critical. Let your voice be heard or nothing is going to change. Debate and dialogue here at board meetings is important, and I'd argue it's even more important to reach out to your county and state representatives like Anthony had mentioned earlier. Reach out to your assemblyman or woman, your senators. Let them know that something needs to be done to fix this broken system. Here's the truth. Laws in the current funding structure is failing our districts and many across the state. Until that changes, we will continue to face the same impossible decisions. But I refuse to pretend that raising taxes over and over again is a real solution. It isn't. It's just a delay tactic. Pilot funds won't save us. One-time tax increases, quote unquote one-time, won't save us because we all know they're not one-time increases. Pretending this will be the last time taxes go up is a promise that will surely be broken. Mark my word. This board will be back here next year asking for more money. Our residents didn't send us here to raise taxes and not solve problems.
That's it? All right, well done. No other red lights? All right.
So at what point, understood that it's a structural problem, right? But at what point do you continue to not raise taxes and just bleed the school dry and let the kids suffer and just say, hey, state, you did us wrong, right? So I get your points, right? But that's what you're saying with impossible decisions, because if we don't choose to do that too, right? We go, right, we get to a point, like at what point do you say it's too much in class size increases, it's too unmanageable, right?
Next year. I'll tell you, Brittany,
So,
that it would be, with a similar number of cuts, the class size would be at a level that I think would be unacceptable to most of our constituents.
But once again, the problem's going to become, and I'm sorry, Brittany, was I cutting you off? Did you want to say something else?
No, I was just saying, I'm agreeing it's an impossible decision, but it's like, you can't just not raise taxes though, and then just let the kids suffer and the school be terrible. You know what I mean? Like, it's just,
Yeah.
so.
And therein lies the issue, right? When will people start actually paying attention and saying, oh, this is a problem, let's get together and handle it, once we actually have to get to the point of no return?
Right.
That's when people will start, standing up and saying, this is wrong, let's get some change in here. And until people start actually showing up and saying, hey, going to your local government officials and making a stink, then nothing is going to happen, and this is what's going to happen. Then you're going to get all pissed off when it's done. We have an opportunity, actually, we had an opportunity the last few years, but we're getting even closer to the point of no return. So it's either put up or shut up at this point.
Well, Anthony, I know when I sat in this same seat 3 years ago, and I'm not smart, but I saw the train coming. We had Michael as the business administrator. Thank God we had a excellent business office, and we still do, thanks to Deb. But we used bank cap multiple years in a row because we had been smart for years before that, saving that money. So if anything, we prolonged the problem. We definitely did, which is, good for us, and we did it for the students.
We
and
certainly
everyone
are
else.
getting problems that other school districts have already faced
Oh,
years
absolutely,
before this,
absolutely.
which is
Like when you
great.
talk about schools closing, schools consolidating, do I see that ever happening here? Not right now, but I can tell you when we used those bank caps, the one thing we did not anticipate or predict was the healthcare going up 32%, whatever those numbers were. And that only exponentially made it even worse. And Allison, I don't disagree with you. The pilots won't fix it. A shared revenue service could help. But I do think with these cuts and clawing back to where we were, say, around COVID time, right-sizing where the staff needs to be, that's a sustainable savings. That's going to help. I'm hoping that we don't have that number again next year, but if benefits go up that much and transportation keep going up, we probably are, right? I probably won't be here anymore, but I can tell you, we've done a nice job, I think, as a board managing it, and, credit to the, HTA rep that's out there right now. I think for this year, everyone contributed. You have cuts, you have the union, gave in, the healthcare waiver. So I think it didn't fall on just one group's shoulders, and I think that's a good thing. But I don't want to keep raising the taxes because that just, but you don't want class sizes. Years ago, we had a goal of keeping class sizes were starting to increase. And we made a goal and said, okay, the board was like, we want a class size to get back down to the low 20s, whatever it was. And we accomplished that goal. And it was costly to do it. Because we had to add teachers, we had to add other staff, things like this. You don't want to go up to 27, 28, into 30. That's going to definitely deteriorate the educational quality that this district is, known for. So, happy we'll get through this budget, but God help us next year, who knows where it's going to come from. But, I totally agree with if we do sell the Lovekert house, which we bought for $650,000. If we sell it for $1 million, well done by the district. It's public information. But it was very, putting it to bank cap, I think, is super smart, just because we need to build up those reserves. So, thank you, everyone, for your discussion and healthy debate. And, there are 31 or 29 some odd souls, listening, which is great. And thanks to the audience out here for